There are big companies that are in the business of marketing. They market products. They market things for big corporations, for instance. What they do is they are constantly surveying, analyzing, finding out what people like and what people don't like. And of course, then what they do is they advise their clients. Design your products this way. Plan your advertising campaigns this way to attract people concerning things they like. And obviously what you don't want to do is you don't want to do things that people dislike. Avoid the things that people dislike because they're going to ruin your business if you don't pay attention to the things they like and also the things that they don't like. If you knew, let's say that you're in the car making business. You're in the car manufacturing business, and there's plenty of those kind of companies in the world. And so surveys have been taken, and you find out that people absolutely hate the color mint green on an automobile. I actually chose that color on purpose because Cindy's first car was I think, a 64 Falcon mint green. But the surveys say people hate that color on a car. You do not want the color mint green on a car. Well, a company would be just absolutely ridiculously foolish if they insisted on manufacturing cars that were painted mint green, right? It wouldn't make any sense at all. And so what we're saying is if you're in business, you observe the trends, you hire people to analyze the trends, and common sense says you do what people like and you don't do what they dislike. We need to apply that same common sense sort of approach to spiritual matters. If we knew that there were things that God absolutely hated, wouldn't it be common sense for us to avoid the things that God hates? Seems to me common sense would dictate that, right? Well, the fact of the matter is we do know things God hates, and not just because we have imagined it or tried to figure it out on our own. He plain out told us the things that He hates. In the text that we're studying, and we continue our series tonight, in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16, where Gage read for us earlier, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are abomination unto Him, a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, an heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren." In our previous 2 lessons, we talked about the proud look, and we talked about the lying tongue. And tonight, we want to talk about hands that shed innocent blood. That will be our discussion for just a few minutes tonight. We'll try to keep it brief. Thanks for being here on Sunday evening. We've had a beautiful Lord's Day in Middle Tennessee, and it's a great blessing to end the Lord's Day with another period of worship, coming together to honor and glorify our Father and to study from His Word. We appreciate you for making it a priority to be here tonight. Thanks for coming. We're glad to see you all. You are an encouragement to us. We have visitors tonight. We're grateful for our visitors. Come back every time you have a chance. And as Joel mentioned in the announcements, if you have any questions at all about what you see or hear as we assemble tonight, please let us know. We'll try to answer those things for you. Thanks for being here tonight. So we want to talk about hands that shed innocent blood. It's one of the things that God hates. I'm going to tell you just right up front, the amount of shed blood that has been shed throughout the course of history is just absolutely staggering when you stop to think about the numbers. I saw some statistics just about the 20th century. Obviously, we're in the 21st century now. But in the 20th century, did you know that 37 million people died in wars in the 20th century? 37 million. But I tell you what I think is even more shocking than that. Evil governments killed 170 million of their own people in that same 20th century. For instance, in the Soviet Union, 62 million people were killed by the government in the Soviet Union in the 20th century. China killed 45 million. Germany killed 21 million. Japan killed 6 million. I'm just putting those numbers out there. I mean, those numbers are just astronomical if you stop to think about it. How many people were killed, blood shed by wars and also by evil governments just within the last century. Now, if you were to go back over the course of all time and add up all the numbers, it would just be off the chart. It is amazing. A lot of shedding of blood. But when you think about the shedding of innocent blood, and we're going to talk more about this in our lesson, but when you think about the shedding of innocent blood, I don't know about you, but in my mind, the thing that immediately comes to my mind is abortion. I don't think there is a more graphic case of shedding innocent blood. And in the United States alone, that's not talking about worldwide, that's just talking about here in the United States. Since 1973, the reason why we always note 1973, that's when the Supreme Court ruled on the Roe versus Wade issue about abortion and made abortion legal in all 50 states of the Union. Since 1973, more than 60 million babies have been aborted in the United States. You talk about the shedding of innocent blood. Isn't that shocking? So when you think about it, since 1973, 60 million babies have been aborted. That's actually more than the number who died in wars in the whole 20th century, approaching twice as many. You talk about shedding innocent blood. Surely the issue of abortion is the most graphic case of shedding innocent blood. So let's talk about this just briefly. When the text says hands that shed innocent blood, we note that the word hands is actually a figure of speech describing a person and his deeds. This is actually the figure of speech that we refer to as metonymy, where a part is mentioned to represent the whole. And so when it talks about hands that shed innocent blood, it's describing a person or people who shed innocent blood. Notice how this figure of speech is used in some places in the Scripture. For instance, in Psalm chapter 24, beginning verse 4, "He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul into vanity, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive the blessing of the Lord." He has clean hands. Well, do you think that means that he just thoroughly washed his hands with soap and water? That's not what it's talking about, right? This is that figure of speech where the clean hands represent him and his whole being. He has clean hands. In other words, his life and his heart are pure before God. Another example in 1 Timothy 2, verse 8, "I will therefore that men everywhere lift up holy hands without wrath and doubting." Lifting up holy hands. A number of years ago in another place, we had a visitor to services who came from a sort of Pentecostal persuasion. And after the services, one of the things that she criticized was that we didn't lift up our hands. We didn't literally hold up our hands when we were praying. And she thought that that was a violation of this. Well, this is not saying that you literally raise your hands when you're praying, but rather that as a figure of speech, when you pray, your hands are pure, that you're living right. In other words, lifting up holy hands means that we are trying to serve God faithfully, and we can approach Him in prayer when we do that. But it's a figure of speech, and not talking literally about our physical hands, but the condition of our life before God. In James chapter 4, verse 8, one more example. "Draw nigh unto God, He will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded." Make sure that you go and wash your hands thoroughly. Maybe even use, we've got out there on the table in the back, we've got a bottle of that hand sanitizer stuff. Maybe even shoot a little of that hand sanitizer on your hands before you try to worship God. That's not what it's talking about, is it? Obviously, cleanse your hands is an expression, a figure of speech, denoting your whole person or being. And so, hands is a figure of speech. We understand that. Hands that shed, we're just taking this phrase apart, hands that shed innocent blood. The expression that shed implies actively causing injury to another. There's ways to shed blood that would not be condemned in this passage. For instance, this is not talking about a situation where someone might be accidentally injured. You might do something and accidentally injure another, and they might lose some blood over it. You might shed blood. Even an accident, we'll talk about it more in a minute, but an accident might even kill a person. This is not talking about that sort of shedding of blood that might happen accidentally. This is not talking about, for instance, a medical procedure. There are medical procedures. A lot of us don't even like to go down that road and think about that sort of thing. But there are medical procedures where blood is shed in the process of performing a medical procedure that's even needed and necessary. That's not talking about that, right? And so hands that shed innocent blood, this is talking about those who purposefully and intentionally cause injury and harm to another. Then, of course, the key part of this expression is the innocent blood. And obviously, when it mentions innocent blood, this is to be differentiated from guilty blood. If there is innocent blood, then there must also, in contrast to that, be guilty blood. And the fact of the matter is that God's justice demands that some men's blood be shed. All right? So not all shedding of blood is condemned by God. In fact, God even mandates that some blood be shed. So emphasis here on innocent blood, not guilty blood. Look, I just want to give you an example from some examples from the law of Moses. And notice how innocent blood was differentiated from guilty blood. And they were treated differently, therefore. They were necessarily treated differently. For instance, the law of Moses said that there were instances in which we might refer to as justifiable homicide. There were the kind of things that might be connected with self-defense. Exodus 22 verse 2, if a thief be found breaking up, and he be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. In other words, a person wouldn't be punished if they found a thief breaking up. And even if they defended themselves and their property to the point that that thief who was breaking up died as a result of what happened, they were not to be punished for that. So this would be a case where the shedding of blood was justifiable based upon the circumstances. As we were saying earlier, sometimes people's blood gets shed accidentally. And Deuteronomy 19 verse 5 describes a situation that we probably would find pretty hard to imagine. I got an idea that it may have happened a lot more frequently back in those days. Deuteronomy 19 verse 5, when a man goeth into the wood with his neighbor to hew wood, and his hand fetcheth a stroke with the axe to cut down the tree, and the head slippeth from the helve, and lighteth upon his neighbor that he die, he shall flee into one of those cities and live. And the cities under consideration are those cities of refuge that we've studied about before in the Old Testament. And so this was an accidental homicide. Isn't that pretty hard to imagine? I'm sure our tools are much improved over the tools they had, but the picture painted here is pretty easy to imagine. But clearly the fellow who caused the death didn't intend to do that. This was accidental. And so this was not a case where he would be punished. This was not a guilty person in that case, and he could seek safety in one of the cities of refuge. But the Old Testament this also described how people should be put to death judicially as punishment for crimes. And we'll back up even farther than the law of Moses here initially. Go all the way back into Genesis in chapter 9. You remember Genesis in chapter 9 would be right at the close or end of Noah's flood. And this famous statement is made in Genesis 9 beginning verse 5. Surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it, at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he him. And so here was the idea, we talked about justifiable homicide, accidental homicide. Here's a case of judicial life-taking or shedding of blood. If a man committed murder, he was to be punished, and the penalty for it was that his life should be taken. In the law of Moses, we know that also carried over. So in the patriarchal period, there was this sense that you shed men's blood, by men shall your blood be shed. That carried over in the law of Moses, Exodus 21 verse 12. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. The death penalty was incorporated in the law of Moses too. And we even know that in the New Testament, that same principle carried over. You remember the situation in Acts chapter 25? In Acts chapter 25, Paul had been arrested in Jerusalem. Obviously, unjustly. There wasn't any fairness to it at all. He had been taken to Caesarea, but Festus, the new governor, said, let's go back to Jerusalem and you stand before the Jews and let's hear the charges that they have against you. Paul knew that those Jews in Jerusalem had a long-standing plot in mind to murder him, and so he refused to go. And so Paul said in Acts 25 verse 10, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. For if I be an offender or have committed, notice, if I have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of those things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them, I appeal to Caesar. Paul understood, clearly his statement indicates that he understood, that there are things that are worthy of death. In other words, life-taking is right and mandated by God in certain circumstances. There are things that are worthy of death. And Paul said, if I've committed any of those, I refuse not to die. He says, the fact of the matter is I haven't, but if I had, I would not refuse to die. And so, accidental life-taking, self-defense kind of life-taking, judicial life-taking, those who would administer the death penalty back then or now, I think, are committing no sin when they do so. But there is a kind of shedding of blood or life-taking that is clearly condemned. We would just call it murder, of course. A lot of times in the Scripture, especially in like the King James Version, it says, thou shalt not kill. And then you read a passage right nearby where it says that a person ought to be killed. And we understand that in our way of expressing things, it'd be better to say, thou shalt commit no murder. You know how they've explained that. All murder is killing, but not all killing is murder, right? Look in Numbers 35. Numbers 35, beginning verse 16. If he smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he smite him with throwing a stone wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he smite him with a hand weapon of wood wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And here the texts that we're referencing are describing what we would refer to as first degree or premeditated kind of murder likely, and the death penalty pertained to that. And so, again, innocent blood has to be noted in what God hates. Those that shed. Hands, or the people who have those hands, who actively cause injury to another in shedding innocent blood, then those are the kinds of things that God hates. Now remember, the gist of what we're describing here is God hates these things. Common sense would say, don't do things God hates. Obviously, don't do the kind of things that we've been describing in our lesson tonight. Pretty simple concept, I think. I don't think you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the concept of this statement, do you? But I want to add one other consideration to that, and that is that we must not support or endorse those who shed innocent blood. Hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go out and murder somebody, right? I'm just not going to do that. That doesn't even cross my mind. I can't even imagine a scenario where I would do that sort of thing. And I'm sure you feel the same way. But I think that an area that we've got to consider, which is particularly practical in our day and time, is back to that issue that we described at our introduction about abortion. As we said, in the last few decades, since 1973, here in the United States, over 60 million babies have been aborted. Let me ask you a question. Would you be willing to make a monetary contribution to Planned Parenthood? You know, Planned Parenthood is the principal abortion provider in the United States. There are others, but Planned Parenthood is the principal one. Would you make a monetary contribution to Planned Parenthood or to a specific clinic that was performing abortions? Would you do that? I think every one of us, are you kidding me? Make a contribution to an abortion clinic? There's no way in a million years that I'd do a thing like that. Rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. Well, what about endorsing those who do? And I think you know exactly where I'm heading with this. What about those who would vote for a political candidate who's telling you right up front that he is going to ensure, he's going to do everything in his power, use all of his influence and political might to ensure that abortion continues, that women can get abortions on demand. You know, there have been a couple of states, even within the last few months, who have gone so far as to say that now a woman might even be able to kill her baby after it's been delivered. I'll tell you, how far this has gone is just incredible. But there are politicians, obviously, who are supporting that sort of thing. You want to talk about hands that shed innocent blood? Can you even imagine anything more perfectly fitting that description than those who do the abortions, the clinics where they're performed, and the political powers that be that make it possible for them to do that sort of thing, right? We wouldn't even dream of supporting an abortion clinic or the people who perform abortions. I don't think we should even lend our political support to candidates who tell us up front that it is their intention that they will make sure that women can get abortions on demand. I think we've got to take that to heart. I've told you before, and I'll repeat it here. I actually made this comment in a gospel meeting down in Texas this spring. And amazingly, I was shocked that someone actually criticized me for saying so. But I'll say it again, I make no apology for it. When it comes to voting for political candidates, I don't care whether the candidate is running for president or local dog catcher. I don't care if he's a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or a yellow dog. I don't care who he is or what party he's affiliated with. I got two questions I'm going to ask. My first two questions. Now, this is what I got to clarify. These are my first two questions. I got more questions. But my first two questions are these. Where do you stand on abortion? Where do you stand on same-sex marriage? You get either one of the answers wrong to those questions, we don't even have to talk about the other questions. Because I'm not going to vote for a person. I am absolutely not going to support or endorse a person, a political candidate, who tells me that he's going to make sure that innocent blood continues to be shed in America. I am not going to be a part of that. You see what we're saying? Now, someone criticized me and said, well, there's a whole lot of other things that we need to take into consideration. I don't deny it. I didn't say that. I didn't deny it in my statement. There are other questions. We can talk about lots of other questions that I have for political candidates. But my first two questions are those. And if you're wrong on those, we really don't have anything else to talk about, okay? And I think that's what we get. Hands that shed innocent blood. These abortions are graphic shedding of innocent blood, and we can have no part in that. We cannot endorse or support those who make it possible. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. We can't participate, we can't fellowship, we can't endorse or support. Our job is to reprove those who do such things. And so, a pretty simple lesson, things that God hates. This one is easy to understand, isn't it? Hands that shed innocent blood. Does it happen? Absolutely it happens. We know that it happens. It's happened a lot and continues to happen a lot. God hates that. God hates that. And so we need to do all we can in personally avoiding it and speaking out against that in our world. Thanks for your good attention to what we had to say. As we bring the lesson to a close, we'll sing a song of invitation, asking everyone here, make sure your life is right with God. If we can help by either assisting you in your obedience to that simple gospel plan, hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, or if we can help by praying with you and for you if you're a Christian who's not been faithful to the Lord. However we may assist, let us know while we stand and sing this.